former sub-postmasters from Fujitsu, the company behind the software at the heart of this post office scandal. Tonight, we'll hear from one of those wrongfully convicted, Jo Hamilton, who told her story to MPs today. She also happened to be sitting directly behind Fujitsu's European boss throughout his evidence in Parliament earlier. We'll get her reaction. Also coming up, the Prime Minister faces a sizable rebellion over his Rwanda policy. 2 Tory deputy chairmen have quit their jobs tonight to vote against the government. We'll be live in Central Lobby. A woman left critically ill after living in a mouldy flat. We'll hear about the impact of the housing crisis on her family. And we'll be speaking to the activist Kwejo Tweneboa about the reality inside some of Britain's poorest homes. Plus, an Arctic blast hits the UK. We'll have the latest from Liverpool, where we join a team of people helping rough sleepers. And I'll speak to the chairman of the Scottish football team who made this pitch for celebrity backers. All that to come and much more on the UK Tonight. After a 20-year fight to clear their names, today hundreds of sub-postmasters got their apology from Fujitsu, the company behind the faulty post office computer system Horizon. Giving evidence to MPs, one of the company's bosses described the scandal as an appalling miscarriage of justice, saying his company now has a moral obligation to compensate those affected. The Select Committee today also heard from the current head of the Post Office, Nick Reed, who was unable to say when the Post Office became aware of known glitches in the computer system. And national correspondent Tom Parmenter has more.
It's taken 2 decades. Some victims are no longer here to see it, but the sub-postmasters now have the nation on their side. Jo Hamilton from Hampshire was wrongly convicted of false accounting due to the faulty post office computer system. She promised her late mother she would keep on fighting for justice.
You're responsible for the loss.
I haven't got that money, and I don't know where it's gone.
The other unlikely hero, Mr. Bates, whose unbreakable persistence was chronicled in the TV drama, appeared as himself and laid out to MPs why the compensation matters so much.
I was talking to one of the group at the weekend. She's 91 years old. How many more years has she got to wait for financial redress? It is absolute madness, and it's very unfair, and it's cruel.
And so it fell to the current bosses of both the Post Office and the Japanese tech firm Fujitsu to face the wrath of MPs.
Fujitsu would like to apologise for our part in this appalling miscarriage of justice. We were involved from the very start. We did have bugs and errors in the system, and we did help the Post Office in their prosecutions of the sub-postmasters.
Alongside him was Nick Reed, the current Post Office chief executive. He's been in the job for 4 years, but was unable to say when Horizon's problems surfaced.
You must surely have had time in 4 years to cut to the heart of this issue, which is when did the Post Office know remote access to terminals was possible?
My role, certainly coming into the Post Office, is to do a number of things. Of course it is to speed up as much as we can and as quickly as we can the compensation that's being paid.
But what's the answer?
I haven't got that specific date.
I think we are both surprised and disappointed that you've not got that question answered on the table.
The nation has now seen this scandal for what it is. And after years and years of delays, the government has been forced to fast-track justice and find the money for victims. The Post Office minister has said they want the compensation settled and paid out by the end of August. 200 potential new victims have come forward since the TV drama aired. Nobody can put a figure on how much will be paid out. And every victim knows that no amount of money can put everything right. Tom Parmenter, Sky News.
As you saw in Tom's report, also giving evidence today was Jo Hamilton, one of the sub-postmistresses who was wrongly convicted. Her story has been watched by millions of people around the country as one of the leading characters in ITV's dramatisation. Let's take a quick look.
What you need to do is isolate your transaction. You need to put in a number that is 1 digit higher or lower, or the computer won't find it.
How's that supposed to work?
I don't know, it just works. Do it.
Last time it showed a loss, I had to remortgage my house. I can't understand why it's happened again.
Me neither. Nobody else has these problems.
Well, Jo and her story feel so familiar to us all now. A little earlier, I caught up with her and her lawyer, Neil Hudgell. I started by asking Jo what she wanted to get across today when she spoke to MPs.
The speed of the entire compensation process. Alan doesn't call it compensation, he calls it financial redress. Because some of the money is actually our own money that we're being given back with interest for the money that they've taken from us. So yeah, it's the speed of the whole process from start to finish. You almost have to prove how much your claim is worth, down to little bits of paper and reports for this and forensic reports for that, and then it goes into the system, disappears for a few months, and then comes back out again, much reduced, and then it goes backwards and forwards. And instead of something that you could actually sit down around a table and thrash out, because none of us are dishonest, you know, what we say is what we're owed, and well, I just think it's madness, and people are getting elderly and people are terminally ill. There's an amount that are dying and have died. You know, how much longer does that have to go on?
Jo, you also made the point that it's not just about the red tape in this compensation process, which is bad enough, but it's the way you're treated. You talked about this process as like being put on trial again, like you're being made to feel like a criminal all over again.
Yeah, you have to prove. I mean, I had to prove everything I put into the post office. I couldn't prove all of it, you know. But they say, well, okay, prove it then. You know, I want the documents for this and I want the documents for that, and you have to work out mileage to probation and things, and just crazy things like that. You know, it's just not fair.
Yeah, I mean, Neil, just not fair. I mean, that feels like an understatement. You know, some of these sub-postmasters like Jo have been waiting for nearly 20 years for compensation, as well as having convictions overturned. Talk to us about this compensation process, because victims were promised by December last year it'll all be sorted. It's now being talked about next year. But today, in front of the committee, we heard that it could all be sorted by this August.
Yeah, I think that the process, as you might describe it, for someone that's new to it, is pretty overwhelming. Just the whole process in itself, there are so many moving parts to it. I think Jo and I appeared before the Select Committee 2 years ago, and in some senses we've moved on a long way. In another sense, we've not moved on very far. And what I mean by that is that obviously the public mood is different. It's all been elevated to a new level, and I think the fact that people have felt empowered to come forward is a reflection of the fact that now everybody feels such widespread sympathy for all the victims and revulsion at the conduct of Post Office. But there's a real heavy caveat to that, in that we've heard lots of good intention, and we will deliver by these days. And as I said today at the Select Committee, the problem becomes in the fine delivery of these things. So we will have healthy conversations with people in senior positions, and then it all gets unravelled in the detail, whereas what we need to do is find simple and creative solutions, solutions such as what the Minister came up with the fixed compensation packages. Now, for some people, as Jo's pointed out, it won't touch the sides, but for others, it may work because their circumstances are all unique and different. And I think we've now reached a point in the journey where, after so long, we can look backwards and use our energy up feeling angry about it, or we can say, draw a line in the sand, and today's the day where actually the commitments that were made are commitments that are going to have to be delivered on. And come the end of the year, everybody that has been an unfortunate victim of this scandal are paid off and able to look forward and enjoy the rest of their lives.
Yeah, well, the Post Office Minister today in front of the committee said August for all this. You don't look
I have one eye on that.
Yes, you'll be holding him to account for that. And just to put it into perspective for people watching, because it's important to remind people of the scale of this. We're talking, 700 plus victims, some still coming forward now. Only 3 sub-postmasters have received complete payouts, full and final. Just 3. That just gives people watching an idea of the long, drawn-out process of this. Jo, I know particularly since this ITV drama, new victims have been coming forward. You've been in touch with a number of people that have felt able, because of that drama, because of seeing your story, to reach out to you personally.
Yeah. I mean, the power of the telephones to actually tell you who you are and where you are, and people be able to contact you. But I've had people message me saying it's happened to me. And as I say, there's a guy who I've known for years, and he never had the strength to come forward. And I introduced him to Neil, and he's in the process now, which he was too frightened to come out before. And I think because there's safety in numbers now, and people, and especially now, people realise the public are actually behind us, and they don't believe for 1 minute we've been dishonest. It's really powerful. We'll get more people, I'm sure we will.
Yeah, and as we were hearing at that committee, there are some victims that are being contacted that don't want to have anything to do with this. They're so traumatised, their lives are ruined, they don't want to revisit it, even for compensation. Jo, today was about hearing your side of the story, and, Neil, I know you were representing a lot of the victims as well, but it was also a chance to hear from the boss of the post office and the boss of Fujitsu. After you spoke to the committee, you stayed in the room to hear what they had to say. Let's have a listen to some of their answers from today.
Mr. Patterson, can you tell me when specifically management in Fujitsu, ideally the month and the year, knew about the Horizon system being faulty?
I can't answer a month and a year.
Yeah, you're saying here now that errors were known, and fine. So when was the first error, again month and year, passed to the post office?
So I can't tell you month and year.
So will you commit to writing to this committee to tell us when?
So I know that Sunak, this is one of the phases of the investigation.
I just want to check, Mr. Reid, from your point of view, when do you think post office staff first knew that remote access to Horizon terminals was possible?
I couldn't give you an exact date on that.
Why can you not answer that question? It is fundamental to this case.
Questions they knew they were going to be asked, Jo. How do you feel watching that back?
Nothing's changed. In all the years, nothing's changed. And I kind of knew that's the answers they'd give, but nothing's changed, sadly.
The boss of Fujitsu sat there today as well, and he said he's not met a single victim of this scandal. You were sitting behind him when he said that. You could have reached out and tapped him on the shoulder.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel? This is the first time he's answering questions publicly in this decades-long scandal, anyone from Fujitsu, and he hasn't met any of you personally.
No. Well, Nick Reed has met some of us and said sorry, but it's the corporate apology, and he hasn't. So he's been able to hide, and I think now, because of the drama, that his feet are being held to the fire, and he's suddenly come out from wherever he's been. But yeah, it is what it is. I wasn't expecting anything else.
So frustrating. So what happens next? That's the big question, because people who have been following this today will be frustrated watching, because they've all invested in you, Jo. This ITV drama, 10 million people watched the final episode. People are invested in this story, and they will have looked at those answers and gone, that's not good enough. Neil, what's the next stage?
I think the momentum of what has started over the last couple of weeks needs to be maintained, and what that means is delivering on promises. It means delivering fair compensation. It means accountability. I think that everyone, without fail, has confidence in the statutory inquiry, has confidence in Wyn Williams and his team to get to the bottom of what's gone on. I think for a lot of people, part of the healing process is that accountability. We've seen lots of medical evidence that says people are psychologically traumatised, deeply affected, and part of that process of getting better will be to see the people that put them in the position that they're in held to account. People aren't vindictive. They've just got a real sense of justice. So those two limbs need to run side by side, full and fair compensation, quickly, accountability for those that have done the wrongs.
Jo, your story was very much a central part of the ITV drama.
Yeah.
How did that feel, watching it on screen?
Well,
what was that like?
It's so true. You know, when you see Monica in the little post office in the dark with one light on, that was me, night after night after night. I used to sit in the office. I'd phoned the help desk and they said, oh, you know, you're the only one it's ever happened to. And I used to think, it's got to be here somewhere, you know, and I'd print off stuff and I could never find it. And it's just, it was a long time of sitting in the dark, trying to, you know, almost in panic mode, thinking, how am I going to tell Mum and Dad and David, husband, and, you know, how am I going to tell everyone I need more money to put in? Because I always thought it was something I was doing wrong. They made me believe that it was me. Yeah, I wish I hadn't been so naive, but anyway, I am where I am. But, yeah.
Well, you're one of the sub-postmasters that had your conviction overturned. You've come out the other side of it. You're still very much living it.
Yeah.
You know, whenever you talk to a victim, you say, you know, this will continue with me forever. It's not just going to go away because my conviction's been overturned or I've got compensation. But you are still in this for others. And I know, Neil, that whistleblowers have come forward since this ITV drama that could be integral to this campaign going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Another positive spin-off of the drama is that people have felt more confident to come forward, whether that's victims or, in this case, whistleblowers. We've had a number of people that we've passed on to the inquiry that may have evidence of interest to the inquiry.
And Jo, just a final thought. This continues.
Yep.
I think, as you said to me before we came into the studio, you want to ride this wave, this momentum. What does justice look like to you?
Justice to me looks like the whole of the group that I went into court with, the 555. It looks like everybody receiving full and fair financial redress. Once all of the 555 have been paid, then my job will be done.
Well, thank you to Jo and to Neil for speaking to me a little earlier today. As Lord Arbuthnot reminded the committee this afternoon, this isn't about a flawed IT system. It's about the decisions made. The Post Office and Fujitsu turned up today and proved in some ways just as frustrating as that flawed computer system to Jo and those she represents. Yes, they are sorry, and yes, victims will be compensated. But when it came to questions of accountability, questions which, let's face it, won't have come as a surprise, the answers weren't forthcoming. Ultimately, the frustration and upset continues for the victims who feel like they're chasing shadows still. As Jo Hamilton said, perhaps it's no real surprise, but she also said the fight continues. Two deputy chairmen of the Conservative Party have quit tonight in order to vote against Rishi Sunak on the Rwanda bill. Lee Anderson and Brendan Clark-Smith said they wanted to strengthen the legislation, joining a rebellion which, if it's replicated in votes tomorrow night, could see the Prime Minister's plans defeated.
Order. The ayes to the right, 68. The noes to the left, 529. So the noes have it, unlock.
So let's find out what this all means. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is live in Central Lobby in the Houses of Parliament. He's been following all the twists and turns. John, what's it looking like as we stand right now?
Well, when that vote was read out, that result by Rosie Winterton, who was in the chair, 68. Well, if you add two tellers, of course, that's 70. That was a bigger rebellion than many MPs were expecting, and a real shock for the Tory High Command and indeed the Prime Minister. That did include the DUP MPs, however, and in a second vote on a Robert Jenrick amendment, the number of votes against the government was only 58. Plus two tellers. That's because the DUP abstained in that vote. But 68, well, that was more than the number of MPs who put their names to the rebel amendments, including, of course, Lee Anderson and Brendan Clark-Smith. Well, they're two deputy chairmen of the party, or were until an hour or so ago, both from red wall seats. Lee Anderson is an ex-miner who's MP for Ashfield up in the East Midlands, and then you've also got Brendan Clark-Smith, Bassett Law, also Nottinghamshire, both seats that were Labour for many, many years. They wrote this letter to the Prime Minister, obviously long before the vote, because it was issued immediately as the voting was taking place. I have to say, it's one of the more polite resignation letters I've ever seen. If you compare it, for example, with the fiery letter from Suella Braverman when she was sacked. Now, tomorrow, more debates. Rebels say they're looking for a compromise. Big question, how many will vote against this bill at third reading? The betting is nothing like the numbers that voted tonight, but it's still pretty perilous and precarious for the Prime Minister, and he'll be pretty shocked by the size of the rebellion tonight, and sincerely hoping it's a lot smaller tomorrow.
John, thank you. John Craig with the latest from Central Lobby. That is a story that's sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview for you and news review from 10:30 tonight. Joining us, the Guardian's political editor, Pippa Crerar, and the director of the Onward think tank, Sebastian Pay. Still to come here on the UK Tonight. A people smuggler jailed for trying to bring a woman into the UK hidden in the dashboard of his car. Some remarkable pictures that have been released by the Home Office. And two thieves spared jail after stealing a milk float and crashing it through a wall. Plus, the UK could be in for the coldest January night in 14 years, with that Arctic blast set to continue for the rest of this week.
Obviously, with New Year's resolutions and everything, I think there's the hardest part for people when it comes to like diet and dry January. When it comes around this time, that's when people really start to struggle and think, can I really go through the whole month? So reading the articles I've read now about Blue Monday, I think the biggest challenges are people working, in jobs, struggling financially, and then that post-Christmas slump of, oh, I'm not feeling very merry, you're not really around family that you may have been around Christmas. And so I can understand why people might go through it. I haven't really experienced it myself. I feel good.
You've done Dry January before, haven't you?
I have. I did it last year. So when I did Dry January last year, it was for a campaign for water aid. So it was more on the focus of more water rather than actually cutting out alcohol. So I actually cut out coffee, tea, fizzy drinks, juice, and I was drinking just water to promote,
you know,
how
were
important.
a lot of fun, weren't you?
I'm always fun.
I'm sure that's true, actually.
Just to promote how good water is. So yeah, Dry January, from what I've heard from my friends who are doing it this year, I think they're really struggling with the terms of just situational, like, or me, I'm a big sports person. So, the playoffs are happening and people watching games at the pub, you're just, inclined to have a drink with your mates and you just can't, you're drinking water and people are like, come on, just have one. It's just one, mate. I think that kind of pressure and stress is why a lot of people fail Dry January. The price of low alcohol and non-alcoholic drinks is actually going up, which is good because it's said to favour people who are more heavy drinkers and they're going for, alcohol-free gin and alcohol-free beer and other drinks, which is great. I haven't actually tried it myself, but apparently they taste exactly the same. But obviously the medical benefits that we know as doctors are, you don't have the short-term and long-term negative effects of alcohol consumption. As you mentioned, the issue is the socioeconomically less developed groups are the groups who are at higher risk of a poor prognosis from alcohol-related disease, chronically and acutely. And so if they can't afford these alcohol-free drinks, they're going to go for the cheaper alternative, which is to have the alcohol. And that's what we're trying to steer them away from. You're almost defeating the aim if you can't access the demographics that you're actually trying to target.
Hello, welcome back. You're watching the UK Tonight. Here's what's coming up. A risk to life from the Arctic blast as the UK braces for what could be the coldest January night in 14 years. And an appeal for A-list investors. I'll be speaking to the football chairman looking for the next big Hollywood takeover. But first, let's take a look at some of the other stories making news in the UK tonight. And a people smuggler has been jailed after attempting to bring a Vietnamese woman into the UK hidden in the dashboard of his car. Now, his vehicle was intercepted at a UK control zone in northern France in June 2022. Border Force officers noticed that the carpet in the passenger footwell of the car was in an unusual position, and on further inspection, the woman was discovered wedged inside a tiny custom-built hiding space behind the glove box. The driver, Slovakian national Joseph Balog, had claimed to be returning from a visit to family in his home country. Today, he was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison for assisting unlawful immigration. A leading comparison site says the average cost of car insurance is creeping towards £1,000 a year. Compare the Market says premiums have gone up by 52% year on year to a typical price of £950. Now, as you might imagine, young drivers have come off worse, with the average up to just over £2,000. Video has been released of two thieves crashing a stolen milk float into a wall in Nottingham. Rico Siddle and Luke Solomon attacked a milkman and stole his vehicle at around 4 in the morning back in March 22. The float was crashed into a wall shortly afterwards, with police detaining them both nearby. They were sentenced to 2 years in a young offenders institution, suspended for 21 months, and they were given 150 hours of community service. Now, now the cold snap is set to continue for the rest of this week. Tonight could be the coldest night of the winter so far for some areas, and could even be the coldest January night for 14 years. Snow and ice is an inconvenience for most people, but for those sleeping rough, it can be a threat to life. Our chief North of England correspondent, Greg Milam, has spent the morning in Liverpool with outreach workers who are trying to keep the homeless safe.
Before dawn, barely above freezing, and the snow's falling, and there are people waking up on the streets of Liverpool.
There was certainly this morning, there was more people than I was expecting to see out this morning, considering the weather, which is obviously not what we want to see.
We're with outreach workers from the homeless charity, the Whitechapel Centre, carrying out welfare checks on those sleeping rough.
We've got 2 people on the team that will go out and they will do a city centre sweep. And they'll see who has been rough sleeping that night, try and engage with them, try and have a conversation, see what's going on with them.
See you in a bit. Some want to be left alone. Others accept a coffee and a chat. While we were with them, the team received a call about someone sleeping outside a loading bay.
We got a coffee for us.
Unfortunately, it is getting worse. In Liverpool, we've seen a really dramatic increase in rough sleeping. We're seeing over 100 individuals every month, well over 100, whereas before we would never get to that sort of triple figure. So there's a lot of people out there.
And many will be sleeping there again tonight. Greg Milam, Sky News, Liverpool.
The Met Office have several snow and ice warnings out for the next few days. Travel disruption is likely. The yellow warnings cover Scotland, Northern England, Northern Ireland and North Wales. Ice is a widespread concern, with heavy snow in places, with the potential for another 20 centimetres in parts of northern Scotland by Thursday. Still to come on the UK tonight. Serena Wiegmann says equality in football is about more than salaries, as she signs a new contract to stay on as England head coach. And new warnings over damp and mould in council flats. We'll be speaking to the husband of a woman left critically ill in hospital. The husband of a woman critically ill in hospital has been telling Sky News that the local council repeatedly ignored warnings about mould and damp in their one-bedroom flat. Morgan Sinnott has a rare genetic condition which makes her more prone to respiratory and heart illness. Her husband doesn't think the council is doing enough to protect vulnerable residents. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi has the story.
Morgan is struggling to breathe. She's in intensive care and has been battling for her life. This is the third time she's caught pneumonia, but this time she had to be intubated.
All up here, it's all down here.
So when was it treated last?
3 months ago.
And it's back as bad as this?
Yes.
Her flat is mould and damp ridden. Morgan has an extremely rare genetic condition called Wolfram syndrome. It makes her vulnerable to respiratory illnesses. Just weeks before she was rushed into hospital, her specialist consultant wrote a letter urging the council to find Morgan and her family a new home.
It's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. They could have prevented this from happening years ago, and they've done nothing.
Epping Forest District Council told Sky News that they were very sorry to hear of Mrs. Sinnott's illness and have repeatedly attended the property to fix issues which have greatly improved the current condition of the property. The council also told us there is a chronic lack of social housing here in Epping Forest and demand far outstrips supply. They are looking at the family's request for a transfer again in view of Morgan's illness, and this will be assessed by an independent medical advisor.
Mum will be home soon, hopefully.
Building new homes to meet demand will take time. But it's time Morgan and her family don't have. Ashish Joshi, Sky News in Essex.
Well, here with us in the studio, housing campaigner Kwejo Twena-Boa, and a familiar face to us because we're here again. We talk about this so much. Kwejo, what is going on? I mean, Morgan had pre-existing health conditions. The local authorities were notified about that. You know families that are in similar positions and they're not being helped. These are the most vulnerable people in society.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been thinking about this story all day, actually, and I just thought if this had happened and this level of negligence had happened in any other public sector area, healthcare, for example, it would have been taken a lot more seriously. Even after the death of Alb Ishak nearly 3 years ago, damp and mould should have been a top priority, not only for government, but also for housing providers up and down the country. But what I see on a day-to-day basis, I go into homes similar to Morgan's, where it's riddled with damp and mould. There's kids living there. I've had situations, many a situation, where when residents are living in homes with damp and mould, they reach out to their doctors, nurses, GPs for help, and often their letters of concern is ignored by the housing provider. There is no requirement for them to even acknowledge any letters or concerns sent by doctors, nurses, head teachers or teachers on behalf of residents or kids living in homes. And I think that absolutely needs to change. It's something I've spoken directly to Michael Gove about. It's something I've spoken to the Department for Levelling Up about, and it needs to be included within Alb's Law too, if this is going to change, because it's all good and well being told we're sorry after a situation like this. I mean, Morgan is in intensive care as a result of the damp and mould. There was pre-existing health conditions there that the housing provider was aware of, but still it took this for her to end up in intensive care for them to respond. And it's always, we're sorry this has happened and we've done X, Y and Z, justification, but it's simply not good enough. She is in intensive care.
The council say they're doing everything they can, which I know is a response you hear a lot from local councils. When we see this story time and time again, sadly for Morgan and her family, it's reached crisis point. She is in a hospital. I could tell how passionate you are, and I understand. What is it going to take for this to change? Because I've been thinking this week a lot about mould in social housing, about cladding on unsafe buildings, and the amount of time in the housing sector that it's taken for change to come through. I mean, you know, a lot of change hasn't actually happened, let's face it. And you look at something like the post office scandal. and how quickly that's moved after 20 years. What's it going to take for something like this housing crisis to be taken just as seriously? I mean, it's clearly not the death of a 3-year-old boy, which is bad enough. You know, where are you at with that? What's going to make a change and a difference?
You would have expected, in regards to damp and mould, the death of our bishop would have been the turning point. The fact that we've got people ending up in intensive care because of issues with damp and mould, you would have assumed that would have been enough, but clearly it's not. I think what needs to happen is there has to be one of two things. Either the government tell housing providers that you have a requirement and must respond to medical professionals' concerns in regards to residents living in poor conditions, or there needs to be leeway for tenants to take criminal action in situations where people die as a result of the negligence of their housing provider. It needs to be allowed, and it's going to take one of them to act as a deterrent. What we know is 1 in 3 Brits are living in homes with damp and mould. 3.4 million of them are living in homes with damp and mould and have kids, young kids, or are pregnant in these homes. And we know at its worst, it can kill. The government needs to go further to add more of a deterrent for housing providers, or they simply will continue to do what they've done for the last 3 years, and not just the last 3 years, for the last 50 years in regards to damp and mould. That is blame tenants and not do what they're contractually obliged to do.
Time to get tough.
Absolutely.
You know, you see this, and often you advocate on behalf of these families because they see what you do, they get in touch with you, and when you put it on your social media platforms, often councils move a bit quicker. Not all councils do, though, because does this speak to a wider problem in this bigger housing crisis? There just aren't enough adequate housing options for people living in towns and cities up and down the UK. And this is the dangerous end. This is the dangerous consequence of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And social housing has been an area that's been neglected. It hasn't been prioritised. It hasn't been somewhere or an area that's been seen as an election-winning policy, really. And as a result, it's been kicked into the long grass and has been for the last 50 or 60 years. And on top of that, the irony is we're still selling off our social housing stock under the Right to Buy scheme. And the little stock that we're left with is in poor conditions, and people are having to live in conditions like this. Health professionals have warned that it's an issue that's going to continue. And I mean, the government can't address fixing the NHS without first and foremost addressing this issue of poor housing conditions that is costing the NHS. I mean, last year, £1.4 billion. It's believed that 20% this winter, 20% of all respiratory admissions to hospital will be as a result of people living in poor conditions. It's time for the government to take this seriously, and it's time for the government to take building social housing, decent quality homes seriously too, because otherwise we will not fix this crisis and it will only get worse. Kwejo,
passionate and on point as always. Thank you so much for coming in to talk to us. Thank you. We'll continue to talk. Thank you. Now, Sarina Wiegman has been telling Sky News that equality in women's football isn't just about salaries. This is after she signed a new contract to stay on as head coach of the Lionesses. Her new deal will end after the next World Cup, which is in 2027. She's been speaking to our sports correspondent, Rob Harris, and she said she is very comfortable with her position.
I feel very much valued, and since I came in, we've got all the facilities that we need to perform at the highest level. We have so much support. And there's growth in everything, also growth in salary. And I'm just really happy with the situation I'm in right now.
In your own mind, do you wonder when there will be pay parity in women's football, between women's and men's football?
No, I think in equality at all stages. And we're not talking about money all the time. It starts we need to invest in the game, in all the parts. And that's what we're doing. We're going into the right direction and we need to keep moving forward.
Sarina Wiegman speaking to our sports correspondent Rob Harris, who is with me now. Sarina Wiegman, this is great news for the Lionesses. A new contract for her has been very much welcomed across the board. A really interesting discussion with her there about how she sees the women's game and what she can contribute and push it on to do.
Yeah, and she's obviously seen how her own team has driven so much change, campaigning to get more access to football for girls in schools. And she looks at the whole discussion over pay with a more broader picture, and she sees about the need for greater resources within teams, within all the coaching staff, for instance, and about the game getting more investment in overall. And for her personally, of course, she is at the very pinnacle of the game. She won FIFA's Women's Coach of the Year award on Monday night for the 4th time. That's a record. And, of course, she's led England to 2 finals, which no England managers ever done before. Obviously winning the Euros, then falling so short when I was in Sydney for that World Cup final, and that's where she's so determined to, as she says it, complete unfinished business and go all the way through to 2027 and the next World Cup. There's a Euros first, but really you get a real sense from her determination and her hunger, and the fact that she's got so much more to do with these players when so many of the stars were out for the last time of the last World Cup, and they'll be back, and she's got so many options, hopefully, for her available.
Yeah, more to do for the team and more to do for the game. You're also speaking to, was it the FA chairman today?
FA Chief Executive.
FA Chief Executive, about misogyny in the game, because the women's game is coming on leaps and bounds, but misogyny rears its ugly head, and it has done recently. What did he have to say?
Yes, there is the ongoing concern in the game about the fact some women in football can face sexist abuse, misogynism, particularly on social media, and pundits amongst those, and it's something deemed unacceptable by the Chief Executive of the Football Association, Mark Bullingham.
I would say I find it absolutely unbelievable in this day and age, some of the points being raised and the questions being asked. We're clearly resolute behind our support for women and girls football and for women in football generally. We have a senior leadership team that's 50% female. We have a female chair. I think our support for the women's game and for women in football is clear, and I probably wouldn't want to dignify any of those comments any further.
Yes, concerns about the abuse that is still faced when the Lionesses in particular are such trailblazers and they're campaigning so much for change across football more broadly, and they're delivering success.
Yeah.
And that's what has brought such big audiences.
They sure are, and the message is football is for everyone. Rob, thank you so much. Rob Harris there, after speaking to Serena Wiegman, extending her contract with the Lionesses. Coming up on the UK Tonight, I'm going to speak to the chairman of the Scottish football team that's made a cheeky pitch for Hollywood investors. Don't ask, don't get. Plus, all smiles for Emma Raducanu. He makes a winning return to the Australian Open after missing nearly a year of tennis through injury.
Very well played.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Coming up here on the UK Tonight, I'm going to speak to the chairman of the Scottish Football Club that is making its pitch for celebrity backing. In the meantime, Dave Fulton is here with the Day's Sport. And just when you think there aren't many stories that will shock you in the world of sport, along comes this story today from Rugby Union.
Yes, Lewis Rees-Zammit is changing, well, not just changing codes, he's changing sports.
He's only in his early 20s.
He's 22, he's played 32 times for Wales, he scored 5 tries in the World Cup, he's established as a superstar of Welsh rugby, and he is going to NFL. He's going to have a 10-week, effectively a trial period. It's called the International Player Pathway, 10-week programme, at the end of which he hopes he'll be selected on a roster for a professional ball club in American football. It's an extraordinary story. Good luck to him. Yeah. But, yeah, it's a tough ask.
Yeah, such a big star in Welsh rugby. It did take everyone by surprise today. But he's not the first player, is he, to make the switch to American football?
Yeah, a few have. Paul Thorburn, Welsh fullback, was a kicker. Christian Wade, probably the most famous. I think we can have a little look at Christian Wade in action, actually, because he played for the Buffalo Bills, having gone through a similar programme, and he ended up scoring this touchdown, a 65-yard pre-season touchdown. Look at him go. I mean, he was a winger for Wasps. He all kinds of tries for Wasps and internationally, and you think, after seeing that, they would have taken him on. They did for a short while, but he didn't get any full-time minutes, so any major kind of minutes, just pre-season games. Yeah. Same thing happened. Lawrence Okoye, discus thrower, had 4 or 5 different clubs, never got season time minutes. So
it's such huge competition in the NFL, isn't it? There's literally thousands of hopefuls going into that game, more than that.
Absolutely. And we wish him all the best. He's dreaming big of making it big in the NFL. There are plenty of English football teams dreaming about winning the FA Cup as well.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
2024 will mark the return of the Olympic Games to Europe for the first time since London 2012.
Team GB sprinters have an enviable strength in depth, but only 3 male and 3 female sprinters can compete in the individual events.
Eugene Amodadzi is one of a number of British sub-10 second 100-metre male sprinters. He's a little bit different, though.
Yeah, a late starter, very late, in fact. He began just 5 years ago, narrowly missing out on the World Championship 100-metre final last summer at the age of 31.
He's getting faster, though, and that's all the more incredible, as before he began sprinting, he'd forged himself a career. Meet the world's fastest accountant.
Right now, I still don't refer to myself as a sprinter. I'm just a chartered accountant. World's fastest accountant, that's what I like to call myself.
Run as fast as you can.
Right, every penny, every little helps, right? That's what people think accountants are. I'm unbelievably proud of my accountant qualification. You know, my parents pushed me to, you know, go to school, do well, get good grades, and qualify, you know, as something. Being from a West African household, it was called like doctor, lawyer, engineer, accountant. So I guess I went down that route. So I'm incredibly proud of it, and you know, I've had those aspirations of climbing the corporate ladder. Ooh. How far do you reckon it is from here to there? About 100 metres?
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Right, let's have a look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Staying cold for the next few days with snow and ice for some. The weekend, though, is looking mild, wet and windy. Southern parts of both Britain and Ireland will be dry this evening, but further north there's a mix of rain, sleet and snow. Parts of Scotland and the hills of northern England looking most at risk of snow, with disruption likely. The rain, sleet and snow is going to ease southwards overnight, leaving icy conditions, but snow showers will continue in the north. There'll be a widespread sharp frost away from the cloudier south, where rain over the Channel may clip the coast and turn to snow. Freezing fog patches are looking most likely in Ireland.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, we always like to leave you with something weird and wonderful, and a football club in Scotland has made a big pitch for a big Hollywood investor.
Hi, are you the next Hollywood celebrity looking to get involved in football? Well, we've got a club that offers real bang for your buck.
Taylor Swift, give some dosh.
Well, Motherwell FC have gathered the stars of their men's and women's team, as well as their fans, there to try and find new backers. That young fan there saying, Taylor Swift, kiss your dosh. The club, of course, fan-owned, and it's not just celebrities they're trying to attract, but as the video makes clear, superstars with deep pockets would be very welcome. Motherwell chairman Jim McMahon joins me now. Jim, good to see you on the UK Tonight. Has Taylor Swift picked up the phone yet?
Good evening, Sarah-Jane. My voice is hoarse because I've spent the last 5 or 6 hours talking to Taylor, obviously discussing her investment and what's going to happen. Taylor hasn't picked up the phone yet, but I'm sure she's closeted with her advisors as we speak, having a debate about whether or not she's going to phone me later. And I can just assure her that if she does phone, my phone, apart from this interview, Sarah-Jane, my phone is available.
Well, we'll keep this interview short just in case, you know, the call does come in, because, of course, she does follow football. It's just the other kind, isn't it? It's the American football at the moment.
Always happens that way.
Jim, it's interesting because, you know, this is a real trend at the moment, isn't it? Big celebrities taking a stake in a sports club. And, you know, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek what you've done, but actually you've created a bit of interest. People have been in touch to invest in Motherwell.
I think it's more than a bit cheeky, Sarah-Jane. I think it's very cheeky, but it's quirky. And yes, it has created huge interest. I think the expression is it's gone viral. We've had millions, obviously I know fully about this whole area, but we've had millions of hits. We've had more people joining the Well Society in the last couple of days than in the past 4 or 5 months. And we've had a dozen or so interests already in potentially investing in the club. So early days, but the first stages are really, really encouraging, to be honest with you.
Jim, you know, I'm a big supporter. I like what you've done. You don't ask, you don't get, right? Talk to me about the club and what somebody with deep pockets would be investing in.
I've been a fan supporter since I was 4. My dad took me to my first game when I was 4. I was hooked then. So that addiction runs for, as you can see, for a long, long time, Sarah-Jane. We were the first Premier team anywhere in the world to become fan-owned about 7 years ago. Over that period, we've managed to balance the books, and we do huge amounts of work outside the club. I mean, North Lanarkshire is generally known as a fairly deprived area, but we spend a huge amount of time with the players, the community trust, on projects, suicide, depression, generally. And the club is a vital part of the community. And I know it sounds like some form of cliche, but it genuinely is. People will come and get help because it's a football club. People who might not go elsewhere think, oh, it's Motherwell, I can go. So I can't be prouder of what we're doing in that area. So what they would be getting is, I think we used the word a proper football club. I mean, I think all clubs are proper. They'll be getting, obviously, an aged board, etc., but they'll be getting a football club with community value, family values, which is solvent, which is more than enough money to see us through the next 2 years.
Solvent, that's a big thing in football these days. That's, you know, that's a big sell.
Most clubs run at a loss. Like 90% of the clubs in the UK run at a loss, and are only kept going by wealthy benefactors. We've managed to keep it stable, but this is about trying to see in the future if we can develop other sources of investment or money. That's the key for us.
Oh, well, Jim, look, we wish you the very best of luck. I'm in Motherwell colours tonight, apparently, to wish you the best of luck on your quest for investors. I'll send you a tenner. Jim, really good to see you.
I think you should join the Well Society, Sarah-Jane. Thank you.
We'll see you tomorrow at 8. Thanks, Jim.